times have worked in that office where common phrases dominate the day? Things that you hear one person say, and then later on another person says it, and then another person says it, and it's obvious that it's not just an individual or two that use that phrase, but it's kind of common culture for the place that you work. I remember when working in corporate America and the big transitions that came when portions of our company were bought out by another company, and we went through the name merger and the name change and the color scheme change and the logo change and the rebranding, and all of this stuff was going on, and yet we were on the phone still trying to sell the same product to the same group of people, but now we had a different name. It was pretty amazing as we went through that transition how many people became resigned to the fact that change is imminent and there's nothing you can do about it. And yet, going along with the flow of the change wasn't really what they wanted to do. What they wanted to do was sink their heels in and pretend like nothing had changed. And the phrases would sound something like this: it is what it is. Think about that for a moment when it describes your workplace, when it describes your relationship. It is what it is. Well, is that a statement of just absolute fact? I mean, is that kind of like the duh, Captain Obvious? It is what it is, not it is what it was, it is what it will be, it is what it might have been, it is what it could have been. There's no imagination in it is what it is. But there is another kind of an attitude that sits behind that phrase, it is what it is. Now, you could go a couple of different directions with that, and that really is the point of my talk today. The difference between two significant attitudes, and if you see it on the screen, you already know where I'm going. But in case you're just listening as you get ready for work or as you drive, it is what it is could fall into two different categories. And in fact, someone might have both of these attitudes and use that phrase interchangeably depending on the kind of mood that they're in. Remember that an attitude is the way you think and the way you feel. What you think and what you feel, that equals your attitude. So you could be switching in and out of different attitudes, and especially those attitudes that are so close together it's really hard to tell. So it is what it is could fit in a couple of categories, but when you start to mix it with others, it reveals itself a little better. So let's add to the common phraseology, it is what it is. Well, it's good enough for government work. It's good enough for government work. Perhaps you've heard that. And usually it's not said by people who work in the government. Usually that's a mockery of the level of completion or excellence that you get from government workers, i.e. perhaps the 15 open windows with one cashier that you experience at the post office or at the DMV. Those are the kind of government work expectations that many people relate to when they say it's good enough for government work. It doesn't really have to be that good because no one really cares anyway. It is what it is. It's good enough for government work. And then sometimes they'll throw that one more in there, whatever will be, will be. I can't change it. I'm not going to try to. It's just going to be like this forever. I have no unction to make changes. And so whatever will be, will be. It is what it is, whether it changes or it doesn't, whatever. So I want to label that attitude for you because I have a feeling you've experienced it, perhaps in your workplace or in your family or in the classroom. So when we put those three phrases together, it is what it is, whatever will be, and it's good enough for government work. When we put those three together, here's the attitude that I see. It's the attitude of resignation. These are people who've just checked out. They're going through the motions. They don't care how good it is or how bad it is. It's good enough for government work. Whatever. It is what it is. They're just doing what it takes to get by, probably thinking, I could be somewhere else doing better with my time. Now, let me give you some of the things that happen when the attitude of resignation is busy in your workplace, especially if you're a leader, a manager, an owner of a company and you start to hear those phrases from the people who work for you, here's some things you can expect that attitude to produce in your workplace. Attitudes will produce fruit. That's a guarantee. Attitudes will produce fruit. Write that down, put it on your bumper sticker, put it on your mirror above your sink while you're brushing your teeth. Attitudes will produce fruit. Attitudes are seeds. Good seeds or bad seeds, they're going to produce fruit. It might be that little prickly pear apple that grows on the top of the cactus. Might be a mushroom. Might be a banana. But it will produce fruit. Guaranteed. So here are some of the things you can expect when the attitude of resignation is in your workplace. Status quo dominates. Status quo, you can't change anything. Status quo dominates. The way that it has been is the way that it's gonna be. Because you can't get any traction trying to move one way or the other when everybody just says it is what it is. Whatever will be, will be. They are so accustomed to the rut that they're living in. This neuro pathway has blazed a trail that will take decades to unblaze. I don't know if you've ever been in that place where we used to live on a corner, and around the corner from us was a school. And so the kids would walk, and the corner was vacant. But the kids would walk around that corner to get to the school or walk back to get to the bus. And so there was a trail blazed through the grass down to bare dirt where these kids had walked this particular path. And it didn't matter whether it was mowed or watered or whatever. Once that rut was there, it was there. And when they put a fence around it, it took almost a full year for that bald spot of dirt to grow grass back. It was almost like the grass was afraid to grow there because the rut was so profound. That kind of rut takes place in your workplace when the attitude of resignation is a part of your workplace. It is what it is. Whatever will be, will be. It's good enough for government work. That group has already checked out. They have no intentions of changing or improving the standing. None at all. Another thing that happens is change reluctance. Change reluctance prevails. It's not just that they haven't changed and they're not easily going to change. It's that they don't want to change. They're so comfortable, even if it's wrong, that it's going to be really hard to blaze a new trail. Even if you were to go in there and dig a giant moat, they would find a way to get through the moat rather than go around the moat because they don't want to change. John Maxwell says it this way, and I'm sure others have said the same thing or very similar. Change only happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the effort required to change. Change only happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the effort required to change. Now that's true of 4-year-olds who put their shoes on the wrong feet, and government leaders too. It's true of students in the classroom and teachers who lead them. Change only happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the effort required to change. When the attitude of resignation is in your environment, change reluctance prevails. Initiative is gone. The idea that someone would step outside the status quo, that would be caught walking outside the rut, blazing a new trail, presenting a new idea, doing something with excellence, that would allow them to stand out, and they're not going to have that. Not going to happen. So it's not just that status quo is hard to change, it dominates, but change reluctance prevails as well. No one wants to be the one that pushes outside the envelope. Initiative is gone. Why would they take the initiative to do something that might make them stand out? There's no reward for it anyway, right? It is what it is. It's good enough for government work. Whatever will be, will be. Why should I try any harder? No one's going to care. My paycheck's not going to go up. It's not going to make any difference. Why would I do that? If there was some kind of reward for that risk, then I might take it, but chances are it's just a big risk. And finally, motivation is non-existent. You realize when a group of people is moving down a rut together, and they've been doing it so consistently for so long, the momentum says just stay in the flow of whatever is here. Good, bad, or otherwise, stay in the flow. Just stay in the flow. That resignation, that checking out of other responsibilities, that lack of initiative to innovate, that unwillingness to try something new, to buck the system, to question the status quo. The motivation necessary to do that, it's not there. It's non-existent. Not to say that those employees or team members or students didn't at one time have the motivation. But the attitude of resignation in the rest of the group is like a wet blanket on their ideas. It'll slow them down, if not completely stop them from bringing new ideas to the surface or acting on them. And unfortunately, our society has proven for decades that when it comes to bucking the status quo, things like fuel technology, the innovations and improvements that could have taken place with cars, if cars moved at the same level of thinking and the same lack of restrictions that computers have. We have nowhere near as many regulations on our computers as we have on our cars, and that's why we've gone from a computer that takes up a basketball court to a computer that fits in your hand. And the one in your hand has more computing power. It has more capability. It has more technology. It has more reach. Because the motivation to make change was rewarded rather than hindered. When it comes to cars, that hasn't always been the case. Just go back and look at some of the cars like the Etzel that were recommended with steerable headlights. So that when into a curve, the headlights would turn to where the wheels were going rather than just pointing blindly down the road. You know, some of the new cars have that technology now where the headlights actually move. They have floodlights that watch the road as well, but when you turn your steering wheel, the headlights in some of the really expensive cars actually move with them. It only took 5 decades to catch up with the idea. Why? Well, because the guy who invented the Etzel and some of those other cars, he wasn't part of the status quo. And eventually he was forced to resign, forced out of the industry. Bought up, all of his ideas were scrapped because it wasn't consistent with the rut that was already there. We've done that in a lot of different ways throughout Western culture and Western society especially. It's really hard to invent new if it flies in the face of something that status quo has been very successful. That goes for political ideas, medical ideas, food and drug, the list goes on and on and on. But I want to contrast the idea of resignation as an attitude that permeates and can dominate your workplace with the attitude that's very, very similar to it, but they're different and they have different outcomes, and that's complacency. If the attitude of resignation is in your workplace, you will hear phrases like, it is what it is, it's good enough for government work, whatever will be, will be. That's resignation. Its very close kin, though, is complacency. And with complacency, you might hear a phrase like, what are you going to do, fire me? Or, I do my job, I stay out of the way, I keep my mouth shut, because the squeaky wheel gets replaced. Now you can see how those two are so very close to each other, but there's a little difference in the outcome. See, complacency by definition is content to a fault. Content to a fault. It's right at the edge between resignation and entitlement. But see, entitlement demands more. Entitlement wants from you. Complacency says, I'm perfectly okay with what I've got. In some corporate environments, you might call it the Peter principle. I've reached the highest level of my incompetence. So I'm not going to tell anybody how things should change, even if I observe them. I'm not going to speak up when there's a wrong against somebody else because it's none of my business. I'm not going to tell you that I have a new idea that would save the company a lot of money and maybe even minimize the workload. See, complacency and resignation together is what I experienced when I worked in the post office for a couple of weeks. Yes, I said a couple of weeks. I got hired for the job. I took the job. The first day on the job, I remember someone asking me the question, what did you score on your civil service exam? I said, I think it was a 90. She said, a 90. Was that before or after points? I said, that was before points. She said, so you have an overall score of 95. I said, yes. She said, yeah, you should be in management, not here on the floor. I said, well, why is that? She said, because you don't think like the rest of us. I said, well, what do you mean? And the reason that she was prompted to ask the question was because there's a particular amount of work and type of work that all rural carriers do before they leave the building. And that's the sorting of the mail from what comes in the big trough and putting it into the slots for the addresses for deliverability, and then bundling it together and then wrapping it in rubber bands and et cetera, preparing the delivery day. And I took the portion that she gave me to do, and I had it done in about 45 minutes to an hour. And that's when she asked the question, what'd you score on the test? I said, why does it matter? She said, well, around here we don't try to get our work done as fast as we can. We try to be as accurate as we can. I said, okay, that's reasonable. Did I make mistakes? She said, no. That's what concerns me. I said, what do you mean? She said, someone who can think fast enough and work fast enough to do the work in an hour or less that we take 3 hours to do changes our schedule. I said, well, isn't that a good thing? She said, no. Because if you realize that you can shave off 2 hours, maybe 3 hours of work every single day, by the time you get to the end of the work week, you finish the job in less than 40 hours. I said, yeah. She said, we get paid by the hour, and we get paid overtime. And the amount of overtime that we get every week because of the process is a significant pay difference for everybody else. It's like a $2 an hour raise to have that extra 3 hours of time schedule every day. I'm beginning to catch on now. Being efficient is not the intention. Milking the clock, getting the paycheck, being able to fit in the flow with everybody else, that's the agenda. And so this blended concept of the attitude of resignation and the attitude of complacency really fit well together in that work environment. In fact, I was about to be the squeaky wheel that got replaced because I was the one doing the work in less time than everybody else. And if I were able to convince management that anybody could do it in this time frame. And so what she was really looking for when she asked about my test scores was, is it a justifiable excuse to say that you're an exceptional individual, that your test scores are off the charts, that you're some kind of superhuman or something, and that's the only reason you can get the work done in that amount of time. No average person could do it. That's what she was looking for. That's complacency, contentment to a fault. We're content to milk the clock. We don't want to upset the apple cart. We don't want to push any harder. We're happy right here. We're perfectly satisfied being mediocre. That was the attitude which dominated that workplace. And I am certain that there are other workplaces where that's true. There are certain classrooms where that's true. I remember being a kid, being the one always having my hand up, asking a question, and being told, will you just stop asking questions? The rest of us get it. It made me really feel like an idiot. Truth was, later they would come to me and go, okay, I don't understand this. Can you help me understand it? Well, why didn't you ask questions in class? I didn't have to. You were. Well, why didn't you want to stay and ask questions? Because I wanted to go see my girlfriend in the hallway, because it was lunchtime, because I was ready for my break. Whatever the answer is, but that attitude of complacency that says, I don't want to be a standout. I don't want to be recognized. I just want to fit right in. I'm content to a fault. I'm so content. If I was any more content, I wouldn't be content. Content to a fault. That's complacency by definition. And very much like resignation, it's really hard to get change to take place when attitude of complacency dominates your workplace. It's really hard to get people to do something different when they're perfectly okay just like it is. So for what it's worth, as a leader, as a manager, when you're dealing with the attitude of complacency or the attitude of resignation, change in your environment is going to be hard. Getting people out of the rut of status quo is going to be hard. But you should recognize the difference between complacency and resignation, because those attitudes have different motivators, those attitudes present different challenges, and those attitudes have a different solution. Tomorrow we'll talk about a couple more attitudes from the negative side, the ones that impact your workplace, and we'll contrast a couple of them in the next video. In the following videos, we'll talk a little more about identifying some of the more powerful positive attitudes and how conversation works both ways, to indicate and to implement attitude. Until then, I hope you've enjoyed this talk today. Please share it with your friends, and love to see your comments on the attitudes that you identified, the phrases that you identified in your own life from the last video. Until I see you again, I'm J Loren Norris, and you've been watching Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.